She stood at the edge of the ballroom, her silk gown the color of dusk, her gloved hands clasped in front of her like a plea she no longer believed in. Candles glittered in crystal chandeliers, laughter floated on violin strings, and Lord and Lady Pemberton's ball was the most brilliant of the season. Yet Alara Ashford, Duchess of Thornwood, might as well have been made of mist. No one approached her. No one asked her to dance. And her husband, the Duke, walked straight past her as though she were part of the gilded wallpaper. She saw his profile, sharp and cold as carved marble, his dark hair brushed back, his evening coat immaculate. His eyes passed over her without a flicker of recognition. He stopped to speak with an earl, smiled faintly at a young debutante who blushed crimson and moved on. He was the magnificent, untouchable Duke of Thornwood, and she was simply the wife he had never wanted. The whispers began as they always did, soft and lethal. A year married and he still won't look at her. Can you blame him? She's so dreadfully quiet. I heard he only married her to honor her father's dying wish. A debt of friendship, nothing more. Poor little Duchess. She clings to the corners like a shadow, no fire in her at all. Alara heard every word. Her chest tightened, a familiar ache settling beneath her ribs. Once those whispers would have sent her fleeing to her room in tears. Tonight they simply settled like stones in her stomach. She had wept enough tears for a lifetime. She had spun herself into hope, into tenderness, into endless attempts to reach the man she married. And she had failed. So she lifted her chin, a fragile but deliberate movement. She smiled a small, empty smile that did not reach her eyes. And she walked, not out of the ballroom but into the garden, where the night air was cool and the stars cared nothing for dukes or duchesses. A year earlier, Alara had stood in a quiet chapel wearing ivory lace and trembling with a hope so fierce it hurt. She had known Alexander Ashford only through her father's stories, a man of honor, a man burdened by a sorrow he never named. Her father on his deathbed had taken her hand and whispered, "He needs you, Alara, more than he knows. Promise me you will be patient. Promise me you will not give up." She had promised with all her heart. She had imagined a marriage where patience would bloom into affection, where her warmth would eventually thaw his icy distance. She had been a fool. The wedding night had been the first lesson. He had come to her chamber door, not to her, stood in the doorway with shadows carved beneath his cheekbones and said, "You should rest. The journey to Thornwood will be long." Then he had closed the door, and she had not seen him for 2 days. At Thornwood Hall, a vast gray manor of endless corridors and silent servants, she had tried. She had arranged his favorite meals, learned the names of every tenant, left small notes on his study desk, a single line of poetry, a pressed flower, an invitation to walk with her by the lake. He never responded. When she spoke to him across the breakfast table, he answered in monosyllables. When she reached for his hand once, quite by accident, he had withdrawn as if she had burned him. He was not cruel, he was simply absent, a ghost in his own home. Months passed. She learned to fill her days with duty. She visited the tenant cottages, discovering damp walls and hungry children. She organized repairs, spent her own allowance on medicine and blankets, and slowly the estate folk began to smile when they saw her. They called her our quiet Duchess, with a tenderness that soothed something broken inside her. But the hallways of Thornwood remained as cold as ever. And her husband remained a stranger wearing a wedding ring she was certain he never glanced at. The night of the Pemberton ball was meant to be different. She had dressed with extra care, chosen the dusk blue gown because a maid had once told her it matched her eyes. She had hoped, foolish, persistent hope, that perhaps in the glittering company of society he might see her anew. Instead, he had looked through her as though she were a pane of glass. The garden path led her to a stone bench beneath a willow tree. She sat, hands folded, and allowed herself the dangerous luxury of admitting the truth. He did not love her. He would never love her. She had spent a year throwing her heart against a locked door, and all she had earned was the sound of her own echo. Tears threatened, but she refused them. Instead, she made a decision. She would stop. She would no longer seek his gaze or crave his approval. She would no longer leave notes he never read or hope for a smile that never came. She would become a true Duchess, efficient, dignified, and emotionally invisible. She would pour her heart into the land and the people who needed her. And she would forget, slowly and deliberately, that she had ever loved the Duke of Thornwood. When the carriage arrived to take them home, Alara sat opposite Alexander in the dark. He did not speak. She did not expect him to. The silence that had once felt suffocating now felt strangely like freedom. She watched the moon trace silver lines across his motionless face and felt the first fragile stirring of detachment. It was terrifying, and it was necessary. The following morning she did not come to breakfast. She rose early, dressed in a simple wool gown, and walked the 3 miles to the village without informing a single servant. She spent the day with the blacksmith's wife, who was heavy with child and struggling alone, her husband away on business. Alara scrubbed floors, cooked a simple stew, and read stories to the 2 wide-eyed children until dusk. She returned to Thornwood with an aching back and a quiet sense of purpose. No one had missed her. Alexander noticed her absence 2 days later. It was a subtle thing. The breakfast table felt oddly silent without her gentle good morning. He glanced at the empty chair, frowned, and then returned his attention to his correspondence. A dutiful wife should be present. He assumed she was unwell and thought nothing more of it. But the next day she was absent again. And the next. He asked his steward, a gruff man named Collins, where her grace might be. Collins informed him that the Duchess had been spending her mornings in the village, assisting the tenants. "She's been doing so for weeks, your grace. She's seen to the repairs on the east cottages, settled a dispute over the mill, and arranged for a physician to visit regularly. The tenants adore her." Alexander stared at the steward for a long moment. He felt a strange, uncomfortable sensation in his chest. He did not know she had been doing any of that. He had never asked. He dismissed Collins and returned to his papers, but the words blurred. Something had shifted. He did not like the feeling. Over the following weeks, Alara transformed. Not outwardly. Her hair was still a simple twist of gold brown, her gown still quiet and elegant. But there was a new steadiness in her step, a calm resolve in her eyes. She no longer hovered near his study door hopping for a conversation. She no longer waited in the drawing room each evening in case he might join her. She filled her days with the estate's needs and her evenings with books by her own fire. The aching loneliness remained, but she wore it like a familiar cloak rather than an open wound. The villagers noticed the change. So did Lord Nathaniel Whitmore, the young Earl of Ashbourne, whose estate bordered Thornwood to the south. Nathaniel was everything Alexander was not: warm, openly kind, quick to laugh. He had chestnut curls and eyes the color of summer leaves, and he had admired the quiet Duchess from the first moment he saw her handing out bread to children during a harsh rainstorm. One afternoon, Alara was kneeling in the garden of a crumbling tenant cottage, sleeves rolled up, dirt smeared across her cheek, planting rosemary with the blacksmith's daughter. Nathaniel appeared on horseback, dismounted with an easy grin, and said, "Your Grace, you put every gardening manual to shame, but surely even a duchess deserves a moment's rest." He offered her a flask of cool lemonade and a smile so genuine it warmed her from the inside out. She laughed, a real laugh, the first in months. It felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Alexander, riding back from a boundary inspection, saw them. He pulled his horse to a halt at the edge of the lane, hidden by a cluster of oaks. He saw his wife, her face alight with pleasure, laughing with another man. He saw Lord Whitmore hand her a handkerchief to wipe her cheek, his fingers brushing hers. A hot, unfamiliar feeling twisted in Alexander's gut. Jealousy. It rose so swiftly, so violently, that he almost spurred his horse forward to interrupt them. But he stopped himself. He had no right. He had given her nothing but cold silence for a year. What claim could he possibly make? He turned his horse and rode away, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. That evening he found himself standing outside her private sitting room. The door was slightly ajar. She was reading aloud from a novel to her lady's maid, her voice soft and musical. He listened unseen, and something cracked inside him. He remembered with painful clarity the way she used to read to him in those early weeks, hopping he would listen. He never had. He had always found an excuse to leave. Now she was sharing that warmth with someone else, and he felt the loss like a physical blow. He retreated to his study and poured himself a brandy. He sat in the dark, staring at the portrait of his father above the mantelpiece. He thought of Alara's hopeful eyes on their wedding day. He thought of her small notes which he had collected in a drawer and never answered. He thought of the way she had looked at him in the Pemberton ballroom like a woman finally surrendering. And he thought of Whitmore's hand touching hers. The brandy burned his throat. Guilt, long suppressed, began to claw its way to the surface. The next day he did something he had not done in a year. He sought her out. He found her in the estate office reviewing ledgers with Collins. She looked up, surprised but composed. "Your Grace, is something the matter?" Her voice was polite, distant. There was no trace of the eager, hopeful girl she had been. He faltered. What could he say? That he had noticed her absence, that he had watched her laugh with another man and it had driven him half mad, that he was beginning to realize he had treated her abominably. "I merely wished to see if the accounts were in order." "They are," she said evenly. "Collins has been most helpful." She returned her attention to the ledger and he was dismissed. He stood there for a moment, utterly lost, before walking away. The coldness he had shown her for a year was now reflected back at him, and it was unbearable. The emotional distance between them grew. She was never unkind, never rude. She simply ceased to need him. She attended dinners when required, spoke pleasantly of estate matters, and excused herself early. She no longer flinched when he entered a room. She barely seemed to notice. It was the indifference that undid him. Lord Whitmore's visits became a regular occurrence. He brought books, shared news of Parliament, helped Alara plan a small school for the village children. Alexander watched from windows and doorways, a silent, tormented spectator. His jealousy curdled into a desperate, clawing regret. He wanted to demand Whitmore stay away, but he knew he had no moral footing. He had pushed her into another man's friendship by his own negligence. One rainy afternoon, Alara discovered something that shattered the fragile peace she had built. She was searching for a particular estate map in a dusty, unused room in the west wing when she stumbled upon a narrow door hidden behind an old tapestry. Curiosity led her inside. The room was small, draped in shadows, and filled with items that clearly belonged to a woman: a vanity with silver brushes, a jewelry box, a wedding veil carefully preserved under glass. And on the wall, a portrait of a breathtaking young woman with dark curls and sad, luminous eyes. Alara's heart stuttered. She knew, without being told, that this was a shrine to someone lost. She found a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon, all addressed to Alexander in a feminine hand, and a leather journal filled with his own writing. She opened it with trembling fingers and read words that made her blood run cold. "Marguerite died because of me. I insisted on the engagement ball at Thornwood despite the warnings about the old chimney flues. The fire started in the west wing. She was trapped. I pulled her from the flames, but she was already gone. Her final breath was a whisper I will never forget. I am unworthy of love. I am a destroyer of light. I will never allow myself to care for anyone again, lest I bring ruin upon them too." Alara sank onto a dusty chair, the journal open in her lap. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not for herself but for him, for the agonized young man who had carried this guilt like a boulder for years. He had married her out of duty to her dying father, yes, but also because he believed he deserved no happiness. He had built walls not out of cruelty, but out of a belief that his love was a poison. She understood it all now. The distance, the coldness, the way he flinched from her touch. He was terrified of destroying her too. She wept for a long time in that hidden room. She wept for the hopeful bride she had been, for the frozen husband who was drowning in guilt, and for the love that might have been if only he had let her in. Then she dried her tears, carefully replaced the journal, and left the room. She felt as though she were walking through a dream. Part of her wanted to confront him immediately, to shake him and shout that she was not Marguerite, that she was alive and willing to fight beside him. But another part, a wiser, wearier part, knew that forced revelation would only push him further away. He had to come to her. He had to choose to be free. A few days later, another revelation deepened her turmoil. She was sorting through a chest of her father's belongings that had been sent from her childhood home. Among old letters and trinkets, she found a sealed envelope addressed to her in her father's familiar hand. She opened it with shaking fingers. My dearest Elara, if you are reading this, I am gone and you have been a wife for some time. I must tell you a truth I could not speak while I lived. Alexander Ashford is a man haunted by a tragedy you may have discovered by now. His first love perished in a fire and he blames himself utterly. When I learned of his self-imposed isolation, my heart broke. He was like a son to me once, bright and noble. I knew he would never seek a wife on his own. So I asked him to marry you, not only to secure your future, but because I believed with all my soul that your gentle spirit could remind him how to live again. I asked a terrible thing of you, my darling girl, but I had faith in your heart. Do not give up on him, but if you must walk away to save yourself, know that I understand. You are braver than you know. Elara held the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. Her father had known. He had sent her into a marriage not just for her protection, but as a mission of healing. The weight of it settled on her shoulders. She had spent a year trying to love a man who was locked inside a prison of his own making. Now she knew the shape of that prison, but knowing did not erase her own wounds. She had been invisible, unwanted, a placeholder for a dead woman's shadow. Could she forgive that? She decided to give him one chance, not through confrontation but through quiet, deliberate honesty. That evening she waited for him in the drawing room after dinner. When he entered, she was standing by the window, the letter in her hand. Alexander, she said, and the sound of his name on her lips, not your grace, but his name, made him stop as if struck. I found my father's final letter. He told me about Marguerite. The color drained from his face. He looked as though she had plunged a knife into his chest. You know. I know you blame yourself for a tragedy that was not your fault. I know you believe you are a danger to anyone you love. And I know you married me because my father asked it, not because you wanted a wife. He took a shaky step forward. Elara, I never meant to hurt you. I thought if I kept my distance, you would be safe from the curse that follows me. Her voice was gentle but unyielding. I am not a curse, Alexander. I am your wife. I have been here, alive and breathing for a year, and you have made me feel like a ghost. Do you understand what that has done to me? He flinched as if she had struck him. I am sorry, he whispered. I am so sorry. It was the first genuine, unfiltered emotion she had ever seen from him. His eyes glistened and his hands trembled at his sides. I thought if I let myself feel anything for you, I would lose you too. I've been a coward. Elara's own eyes filled, but she held his gaze. I have loved you since the day we wed. I tried to reach you in every way I knew. But I am not a saint, Alexander. I am not a healer who can pour love into an abyss forever. I have decided to stop waiting. I am leaving for London to stay with my aunt for a time. I need to remember who I am outside of this house, outside of your rejection. The word leaving hit him like a cannon blast. He crossed the room in 3 strides and grasped her hands, the first voluntary touch of their marriage. No, please don't go. His voice cracked. I know I have no right to ask, but please give me a chance to make this right. She gently withdrew her hands, her heart breaking at the desperate hope in his eyes. You have had a year of chances. I need time, Alexander, and so do you. Time to decide if you truly want a wife or merely a quiet household. She left the next morning. The carriage pulled away from Thornwood Hall under a gray sky, and Alexander watched from the steps, his face ashen. He had never felt such devastating loss. Not since the fire. But this time the loss was not an accident. He had caused it, brick by brick, with his own frozen heart. The weeks that followed were the darkest of his life. The house, once merely cold, became a tomb. Every room held memories of her, her books, her embroidery frame, the faint scent of lavender. He found the small notes she had left him, now yellowed, and read each one with tears streaming down his face. I hope your day is kind to you. The lake is beautiful at sunset. Perhaps we might walk there together one day. You seemed tired this morning. I prayed for your rest. He had ignored them all. He had been a fool, a monstrous, terrified fool. He began to emerge from his self-imposed prison. He visited the tenant cottages and saw the repairs she had commissioned, the school she had planned, the lives she had touched. He spoke with the blacksmith's wife, who told him how the Duchess had held her hand during a difficult birth and wept with joy at the baby's first cry. He heard Whitmore's name mentioned and felt a jealousy that was no longer sharp, but a deep, aching sorrow. Whitmore had been there when he had not. Whitmore had seen her light when he had been blind. He wrote to her, letter after letter, pouring out his guilt, his fear, his dawning love. He told her about Marguerite, not as a shrine, but as a wound that was finally beginning to heal because of her. He wrote that he did not deserve her forgiveness but would spend the rest of his life earning it if she would allow it. He sent the letters, but she did not reply. Days turned into weeks. The silence was agonizing. Finally, a letter arrived, not from Alara but from her aunt, a kind but firm woman. It said simply, "She is well, but she needs more time. Do not rush her. If you love her, prove it by waiting." So he waited. He tended the estate with a new humility. He had the hidden room in the West Wing cleared, the portrait of Marguerite respectfully moved to a smaller memorial space in the family chapel. He no longer wanted a shrine, he wanted a life. He walked the lake path every evening, imagining Alara beside him. He began to hope, not because he felt deserving, but because she had taught him through her absence what love truly meant. It meant sacrifice. It meant patience. It meant letting go of the past to reach for the future. Spring was melting into early summer when he could bear it no longer. He learned through a discreet inquiry that she had gone not to London, but to a small cottage by the sea in Cornwall, a place her mother had loved. He rode for 3 days, his heart a frantic drum in his chest. He had no plan, only a desperate, consuming need to see her face. He found the cottage perched on a cliff, surrounded by wild roses. The sea air was sharp and clean. He dismounted, his legs unsteady, and saw her before she saw him. She was standing in the garden, a shawl around her shoulders, her hair loose and wind-tossed. She was painting a canvas of the churning sea, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked different, not fragile, not distant, but whole. She was beautiful, and he realized with a pang that she had found peace without him. That hurt more than anything. But it also gave him a strange, bittersweet hope. She had healed. Now perhaps she could help him heal too. She turned and saw him. Her brush paused mid-stroke. For a long, trembling moment, neither spoke. The sound of waves filled the space between them. "Alexander," she breathed, not cold, not warm, simply surprised. He walked toward her slowly, as if approaching a deer. He stopped a few feet away. He had rehearsed 1,000 speeches, but everything fled. All he could say, his voice raw and broken, was, "I am a fool. I have been dead inside for years, and you came and brought me back to life without me even noticing. I love you, Alara. I love you with every shattered piece of my heart. I know I am too late. I know I hurt you, but I had to tell you in person. I had to ask if there is any chance, any tiny chance, that you could ever forgive me." Her eyes glistened. She set down her brush. "I forgave you the moment I read about Marguerite," she said softly. "I understood why you were the way you were, but understanding is not the same as trust. You built walls so high I nearly lost myself trying to climb them. I had to leave to find myself again." "I know," he swallowed, "and I am grateful you did. You became strong in spite of me. I see that now. I don't want you to be my healer, Alara. I want to be your partner, your friend, your husband in truth, if you will have me." He drew a shaky breath. "I will spend every day of my life making sure you never feel invisible again, even if that means letting you go. I will do whatever you need." The wind lifted her hair. She studied his face, and she saw it, not the cold marble mask, but the man beneath, raw and terrified and desperately in love. She saw the shadows of guilt that still lingered, but also the light of a stubborn new hope. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, and now it was here, and it was imperfect and messy and utterly real. She stepped forward and took his hands. His fingers were cold, trembling. She squeezed them. I never wanted to leave you, Alexander. I wanted you to see me. I wanted to be more than a duty. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you. I have always loved you, but I need you to promise me something. Anything, he choked. No more ghosts. No more locked rooms. If we face the future, we face it together. The pain, the fear, the joy, all of it. I will not be a silent partner in my own marriage. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. He was sobbing, great heaving sobs that shook his powerful frame. She held him, her own tears soaking his coat. The waves crashed below, and the wind sang around them, and the world narrowed to the simple, extraordinary reality that they were finally, truly together. I promise, he whispered into her ear. No more ghosts, only you, only us. They stayed in Cornwall for a fortnight, walking the cliffs, talking as they had never talked before. He told her everything, the guilt, the nightmares, the day he had first seen her and felt a dangerous flicker of hope he tried to crush. She told him about her loneliness, her letters, the moment she decided to leave. They learned each other slowly, carefully, like two people discovering a new language. There were no false promises of instant healing, only a steady, patient rebuilding. When they returned to Thornwood, the servants noticed the difference immediately. The Duke laughed, not the polite, empty laughter of society, but genuine, surprised laughter when his wife teased him about his terrible attempts to help in the garden. He walked beside her openly, his hand often brushing hers, his eyes following her with a tenderness that made the housekeeper smile in private. The walls of Thornwood, once so cold, seemed to warm with the sound of their voices. Lord Whitmore visited one afternoon, and Alexander greeted him with a firm handshake and sincere gratitude. "You were a friend to my wife when I failed to be," he said quietly. "I will not forget it." Nathaniel, gracious and perceptive, saw the change and bowed with a genuine smile. "She deserves every happiness, your grace. I am glad you have found it together." There was no rivalry now, only respect. A year later, Thornwood Hall was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and the sound of a baby's cry. Alara, resting in a sunlit chamber, held their newborn daughter in her arms. Alexander knelt beside the bed, his face transformed by a joy so pure it erased every lingering shadow. He touched the baby's tiny fingers with awe. "She has your eyes," he murmured, "and your stubborn heart, I hope." Alara laughed, weary but radiant. "She will have your courage, the quiet kind, the kind that learns to love again." He kissed her forehead, then the baby's cheek. "I was a man lost in the dark," he said softly. "You brought me into the light. I will thank God every day for the gift of you." Outside, the sun set over the lake they now walked beside every evening. The water shimmered gold and rose, and the future stretched before them, uncertain but no longer feared. They had walked through pain, distance, jealousy, and regret. They had faced the fear of loss and found a love strong enough to confess, to forgive, to heal. And in the quiet beauty of that moment, the Duchess who had once walked away knew she had finally come home.